So if you do not know me, my name is Josie Badger, and I am the director of the Raise Center. The Raise Center is funded by the RSA to help youth with disabilities and their families during transition into adulthood, supporting them in using vocational rehab and independent living to have successful adult lives.
Thank you, Josie. Can everybody hear me okay? John, are you picking me up okay?
Yep,
Excellent.
sound good.
Wonderful. Well, this is great. Really looking forward to speaking to you all. My name is Sean Roy, and I am with an organization called TransCen, which is short for Transition Center. We are a national training and consulting organization really focused on meaningful work and community inclusion for individuals with disabilities. And we've partnered with Josie and Lauren and Raise for the last couple of years to develop some products. And this particular year, we're doing some work around self-determination and what is how do you support families to keep a focus on self-determination, and really excited about that particular topic. A little background on me before I ask John to introduce himself. I have been at TransCen for about 6 years, but before that, I was at the Pacer Center in Minneapolis. And in fact, I'm coming to you from outside of Minneapolis today. So I am no stranger to the parent training and parent support world. And that's why I'm really, really excited to talk to you all about these important topics. John, why don't you jump in and let the people know who you are?
Sure. Hello, everybody. I'm excited to be here. My name is John McNaught. I am the principal investigator of the Undetermined project. It's a project I helped start and create back in 2006. And I am at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia. So that's the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. And I'm excited to be talking to you today about self-determination.
It's great. So we have everybody for an hour. And so we're going to keep you engaged and throw a lot of information at you. So we want to talk about really what is self-determination. I think sometimes there's some confusion in terms. John's going to walk us through the elements of self-determination, which I find to be just a wonderful way to break things down and make these concepts usable. We're going to get into then, within the context of those slides, some strategies for families to be able to promote self-determination in their youth or young adult with a disability. And then at the end, what I'd really like you to do, and maybe as we go through these slides, kind of ask you to keep in mind, what is then the potential role of people who support families? So that might be parent training and information centers, that might be the parent information and training projects through RSA, or you might be here in another capacity, but we really want to kind of brainstorm at the end a little bit about that. So John, next slide, please. A little bit of context here around this. Now, this is just one person's observation, and that one person is me, about what I have seen over the last 20 plus years in working around family engagement and trying to reconcile where student empowerment, self-determination really fit. I think for many years, the two were separated, that we had parent engagement efforts and we had student empowerment efforts, but the two were not really often linked. And so parents were not getting messages about the fact that you can support your student while still promoting the idea of the student eventually taking over and making decisions for themselves to the greatest extent possible. The two lived separately, and frankly, I think the two ideas lived at odds with each other. And I think that what we're starting to see is that we're starting to see the disability field in general realize that siloing is not really helpful, that families play the most important role in the lives of a youth or a young adult, and that we we can empower families with strategies to be able to build these skills in young people. That's probably our best bet, to be able to start seeing young people who are able to speak up for themselves and really make choices for themselves. But, you know, in my work with families, and I still do a ton of it around the country, I see that there's a lot of doubt on the part of families, a lot of fear, and frankly, a lot of negative messaging about allowing individuals to be able to make their own decisions. I see almost a tendency for people to hold people even closer now than I have seen before. And I think that it's probably a function of a lot of things. Eventually, though, when you work with families the right way, they do come to see the value in self-determination. They realize that that ultimately the goal is for the ones that we support to be able to be the main driver of the decisions in their own lives. And when you frame it in the right way, families, you know, not only embrace it, but they become partners with us in being able to do that. And so that's what we want to do today. Is we want, with John's help, and you know, John is just amazing. I've seen him present on this several times. I've partnered with him. I think he's the best in the business. And so with John's help walking us through the core elements of self-determination, we can then determine what is the best way for parent training projects to be able to play that role. So the next slide, I'm just going to hand it over to John and let him do his thing. I'm going to interject every so often with any questions or observations I have. But John, take it away.
Thanks, Sean. So first, I just put in the chat our website. So everything I talk about, plus a ton more of resources are all on our website. Everything's free. Everything's downloadable. We also have thousands of videos of youth with disabilities, parents, family members, general education teachers, special education teachers, administrators, all talking about and speaking to not only the importance of self-determination, but their journey in the process. So it's a great resource if you're not familiar with it, and everything's free. And then before I get too deep into it, just quickly about myself. So I come at this work through three different lenses. So the first lens is teacher. I started my career as a special education teacher. I worked with middle school and high school students. I did that for a number of years. I eventually got a doctorate, and so another lens I look through is researcher. I do a lot of research on post-school outcomes for individuals with disabilities, and specifically what role self-determination plays in that. And then lastly, I'm also a parent. And so I've got two daughters. One is a junior, one is a sophomore. My youngest was diagnosed with ADHD combined type, general anxiety disorder, and OCD. And so I've sat on both sides of the table in my career, and that has given me more appreciation, a different perspective. And, you know, I think my kids are both products of growing up in a house where we push self-determination. And I'll be the first to tell you, as a parent, sometimes that's great. And sometimes I think I might have created two little beings that are maybe too determined. But we'll talk about that. So when I say self-determination, just real quick in the chat, write some things that you think of. What is this thing we talk about, self-determination? What comes to mind when you hear the word self-determination or I'm determined? Good choices. Excellent. You know, I know for me, agency, great. When I first heard about self-determination, you know, 20-something years ago, the first thing that popped into my head was self-advocacy. And I was like, oh, you know, if you could speak up for yourself, yeah, you're good to go. And that's just one piece of it. I can already tell we have some varsity level people on this call, because I'm seeing autonomy, I'm seeing resiliency, decision making. Sean said this will be an advanced group, so great. So when I look at self-determination and the elements of I'm determined, you know, I view this through the lens of, think of a pyramid or building a house. So you have to have a foundation, right? And so I group this in skills, abilities, and beliefs. So there's some skills you need, right, as the foundation if you're going to want to be act in a self-determined way. So like someone said, the ability to make choices, the ability to make decisions, the skill of making choices, the skill of making decisions, problem-solving opportunities, right? And once we develop those, it leads to abilities like setting and achieving goals, regulating your own behavior, advocating for yourself. And once we master those abilities, we lead to this belief. And when I think of beliefs, I think of, like, you know, Maslow's self-actualization, right? This is where we want to be. So the belief that one has control over outcomes that are important to his or her own life, internal locus of control. Self-efficacy, you've got, like, you feel like you've got the skills needed to succeed in a particular situation. And then self-awareness, I know what I'm good at, I know where I need help, right? And I know how to ask for it, I know what my needs are. And historically with self-determination, a lot of times we've come at it in this piecemeal approach. So we'll do something like start with self-advocacy, and the kids don't have any foundational skills yet, right? And so it doesn't always work or doesn't always stick. And so I like to approach this work in a very strategic sense. What we've learned over, 2006 to 2023, so, 16, 17 years, you also need an environment in place that supports self-determined behavior, okay? And this is sometimes where we've missed the mark as a field. And so we look at self-determination theory, which talks about three concepts: competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And so if you want to remember that, just use the acronym CAR. And we're going to talk about what each of those mean and how we ensure they're present in the environment so that our children, our students, our individuals with disabilities will have the supports in place to act self-determined. And so when you look at the undetermined model, and if you're interested in research, I've got a couple articles that look at positive post-school outcomes of kids who've gone through undetermined versus kids who haven't. But you take the left side, the skills, the abilities, and beliefs, and the elements of self-determination, right? And the key, right, is filtering them through, teaching them in an environment that supports CAR, competence, autonomy, and relatedness. That will lead to a positive post-school outcome. So since 2006 at Undetermined, we measure positive post-school outcomes just like the federal government, right? You're involved in post-secondary education, you're competitively employed, or you're in some kind of training program. And so the kids who have come through Undetermined, we're at 100% positive outcomes. Nationally, you look at post-secondary ed, it hovers around 30. If you add in employment, we hover around 60. It's our belief that what's missing, right, is this building of competence, autonomy, and relatedness across environments. So at home, in the classroom, in the community. What we're going to talk mostly about today is how do we do this at home? So when we look about, we use that CAR acronym for competence, autonomy, and relatedness. So this is the CAR engine, right? These are the key players. And so we've got in the schools, we've got our educators and counselors, our administrators. Obviously, we need the youth. They're the largest piece of the cog. And then there's the families. And, Sean is 100% right. A lot of times, this family engagement and youth empowerment were not linked. And it causes cognitive dissonance sometimes because different messages are being heard or different interpretations of different messages. And when the cogs aren't running together, the car breaks down, right? And so the way as a field we're operating right now is the check engine light is on. So if you're, I'm 48 years old. So if you're around my age or older, you grew up that if the check engine light came on, right, we pulled the car over, okay? The students I teach in college now, and if the check engine light comes on, they put a piece of tape over it, right? And so I think as a field, we've been putting a piece of tape over the check engine light for a while. And, you know, self-determination is not a new concept. Transition is not a new concept. Family engagement is not a new concept. But post-school outcome numbers for individuals with disabilities has not changed significantly in 30 years, okay? And so we need to pull the tape off. We need to pull the car over. We need to do something different. And we're going to talk about what that looks like today. So before we get started, in the chat, what are some barriers that you think exist that prevent students from becoming self-determined? Because we know it's not something they just, you know, without some kind of intervention, it doesn't just magically happen. So what are some barriers that you all see in your work? So I see confidence, excellent. Protective helping, I like that. Lack of support, unsupportive adults. Practice, good. Academic priorities, good. Skills, excellent. Lack of support, space to make mistakes. Oh man, you guys are excellent. Yes, so all those are barriers, right? And what happens is there's, you know, we talk about this research to practice gap all the time, but in order to close the gap, we have to understand the research and see what it looks like in practice. And that's the part we've missed with self-determination. You know, people come out with a cool app for goal setting and it's great, but is it actually teaching a skill, right? And so that's the challenge. How do we address it? So let's go one by one. Competence. Competence is having the confidence to use your skills to solve problems and set goals, okay? So how do we build this thing? So when we look at competence, right, specifically, we're looking at problem solving, self-advocacy, self-awareness, and self-efficacy. Those are the elements that we want to focus on. Now, the key is, how do you build competence, okay? Look at that first one, specific positive feedback. In the chat, go ahead and write one of those words is more important than the other one. Specific or positive? What is the most important word in that strategy? Is it specific or is it positive? So like almost 50-50, heading a little bit more towards specific. So look, it's great. It is great to be positive. You know, I love giving kids fist bumps and high fives, but if we're not giving specific feedback, right, whether it's positive or constructive, learning is not going to take place, okay? If all I'm saying is, hey, good job, awesome to see you, you're the best, versus, you know, when I was teaching, I used to have students write in journals. This was kind of like the pre-computer age or just the beginning of computers, right? And so I would say, okay, you know, we'd have different prompts throughout. And the deal was I would write back, however much they wrote me, that's how much I would write back to them. And so, you know, I still remember this kid just detailing his week. This kid would never write a lot, but he was just, man, he had a really good weekend. And he did a really nice job laying this out in the journal. And I said, Cody, I really loved your use of descriptive language, man. I felt like I was there, right? It was so vivid. The adjectives you used, the way you laid this out sequentially. I mean, I felt like I spent the weekend with you, right? How different is that than, hey, man, nice essay, good job, right? Specific. We've got to be clear about what we're seeing, right? Thank you for doing your chores without being asked. Thank you for cleaning up your room and getting everything into the hamper. Thank you for opening the door when I'm bringing in a bunch of groceries, right? Specific feedback. Then let's think of opportunities to respond. You know, I know as a parent, you know, sometimes I want something done fast, and I don't pause enough to let my kids process the request, or I just hammered them with 45 things to do all at once, right? How are we giving opportunities to respond? Are we when a problem arises, so think problem solving, are we giving our kids, right, an opportunity to respond to the problem, an opportunity to learn how to solve it, right? I think of this a lot. Think of the game show Jeopardy. Okay. In Jeopardy, the first 2 rounds are all about speed, right? The fastest person to buzz in, right, gets it. And so if you're at home dealing with your kids that way, or if you're in the classroom teaching that way, the fastest processors always give the answer and always have the opportunity to respond. If it's a correct response, that builds competence. So how do we give our less than fastest processors the opportunity, right? Think of Final Jeopardy. We ask the question, the music plays, we just leveled the playing field, everybody processes, everybody gets a chance to answer, right? So then instead of just one person having the opportunity to build competence, right? We just gave it to 25, or if we have 3 kids, we just gave it to 3 kids in our home, right? So we've got to remember that leveling the playing field around response time often is remembering to give the response time, right? And look, sometimes as a parent, you're just in a rush, right? And that's okay. That's life. That just can't be the default, okay? Practice. You know, no one becomes a professional of anything without practice, right? And so if we want our children to be self-determined, right, we have to build in opportunities to practice those behaviors at home, okay? And we'll talk about how to do that in a second. But the reality is they have to exist every day. You don't end up in the NBA because you shoot hoops once a week, right? That's just not how it works. You don't become a chemist by, you know, watching one YouTube video on how to make baking soda volcano, right? There's got to be constant opportunities to practice advocacy, opportunities to practice problem solving, okay? Now, we do that through scaffolded support, right? So when one of the barriers someone wrote was, you know, paraphrasing, but, you know, sometimes parents giving too much support. So what does that scaffolded support look like? And it's understanding that, look, the overall goal, the ultimate goal is for our student to have as much independence as possible, right? That's the goal. So maybe we start with, you know, depending on your personality, maybe you start with a higher scaffolding and then you slowly bring it down, right? Maybe you start with just a little bit of scaffolding and see what happens, okay? Point being, some kids, before they're willing to practice, are going to want to know that there's a net, right? And so we need to provide that net. When we do that, that reduces anxiety, okay? You know, I was doing some research a couple of years ago around kids in the classroom, and the research question was, in your classroom, who are the kids least likely to take an academic risk? And anyone know what the answer is? It was the students who are identified as gifted, right? They have so much anxiety around not making a mistake that they don't want to take a risk, right? So now think about if you are at home, right? And you're being pushed to practice, there's no support, and you have anxiety. Are you going to want to act that? Are you going to want to try that? No, of course not, right? And so it all kind of fits together into a puzzle. So let's look at some specific activities, right? So before I give you mine, what are some actionable things we can teach parents at home to do to build this this idea of competence, right? And I'll give you my little hints are start small and disability awareness. Those are my little hints. So in the chat, just what do you think? What are some things we could do at home to start building competence in the children? What are some things parents can do?
And John, while people are typing, I just want to reinforce, I think this idea of scaffolding is so important, because sometimes when you approach families with this idea of allowing their kids to make big decisions, they automatically default to, oh, they're gonna make all of the decisions. And we need to give families that opportunity and students that opportunity to kind of move that dial whenever it's needed, and have families be able to practice that. I think that's just a great concept.
Yeah, I agree. And there's excellent excellent ideas here in the chat. I'll tell you what I did. So with my two kids, starting around 5 years old, we did the cook dinner of choice one night a week. And so, and this fits into the scaffolding. So when they were 5, there was a lot of scaffolded support, right? And so, if they wanted pasta, we would talk about what that looks like. What do we need to go buy at the store? I didn't really have a 5-year-old picking up a boiling hot pot of pasta. But we did that every week. Each kid had their own night. And so they would write the menu down. We would go shopping. We would do the whole thing. My youngest created Gracie's favorite pasta, and we ate it for like 10 years. It felt like every Wednesday. And so my way of kind of slipping in, Gracie also loves steak. And after like the 10,000th pasta dinner, I was like, hey, do you want to learn how to make steak on the grill? And so now a lot of Wednesdays we get steak. But look, right now they're a sophomore and junior in high school. One is a phenomenal cook. Gracie, she can grill, she can make pasta. Chloe, my oldest, really got into desserts. And so she makes pastries, she makes cakes, she makes, you name it. But they both feel very competent in the kitchen, right? And you talk about a life skill, there we go. Problem-solving opportunities. Look, my kids are a year apart, and there were times when they got in a problem, and I would say, you go in that corner and you go in that corner and just be quiet and stop yelling at each other, right? Now, if that was my approach, what happens 2 seconds later, right? They're in the problem again, right? They're fighting again because nothing got resolved. And so understanding that certainly not every time siblings get into a problem is a teachable moment. But again, if we can make them teachable moments more often than not, right, they're going to learn problem-solving skills, right, which are essential to, right, adult life. Walking them through all that. And then lastly, using strength-based language. So, I've worked with thousands and thousands and thousands of kids with disabilities in my career. Special education can still to this day oftentimes be such a deficit-based mindset. And, these kids can tell you 25 things that they can't do, but can't tell you 3 things that they're good at. And we've got to change that, right? We've got to get out of this deficit-based mindset. Look, is it important to know what you struggle with and what you need help with? Absolutely. Is it equally important to know what you do really well? Absolutely, right? And that's not just a disability thing. That's just a human being thing. Like, I know I'm a big picture guy. I like coming up with crazy ideas. And I also know I need a detail person in my life to make those ideas reality, right? That's okay. What's not okay is for a 16-year-old not to be able to tell me 3 things they're good at, right? And so consistently using strength-based language, in our home, and that kind of links to that specific positive feedback, right? I've learned through my daughter's kind of struggles with school, public school, you talk about like a square peg in a round hole. Public school, in my experience, perfectly fits a lot less kids than I originally thought 20 years ago, right? And when you have a kid who's the round ball in the round hole, you don't give much thought to school because they just kind of cruise through it and everything's fine. But when you get a square peg, you start realizing, that the current model just isn't necessarily the best. And I will tell you this, the most powerful thing, the thing that moves the needle for my kid the most is her ability to go up to somebody because she feels confident and competent and tell them what she needs. And that is, leads to, in her experience, getting the accommodations she needs. So one way to build this, I'm not going to go too deep into this at all, but if you just Google the Good Day Plan on the website, there are implementation videos that walk you through how to implement this, and you can make one specific for home. I encourage parents to make one for themselves, but again, there's an implementation guide and videos on the website. So let's dig into autonomy, feeling in control of what happens, right, in any situation. Choice making, self-regulation, internal locus of control, decision making, self-awareness. So how do we do this, right? I saw earlier building in choices, delegate responsibility, allowing failure as a learning experience. Look, I can still remember being an elementary school kid and being chosen to go outside with the erasers and bang them against the school wall to clean them. And just that autonomy and that responsibility given to me, it just felt so good, right? And so, not making sure at home we are doing that. And then allowing failure as a learning experience, I think kids, sometimes in school, right, the model is, let's just say history class. You go to history class, you're working on a unit, there's the unit test, you failed the test. What do you do the next day? You're on to the next unit, right? And so in that scenario, kids learn that failure is the end. And that's not how we do things, right? Failure is the middle, okay? So you try something, you fail, then you stop, you reassess, you replan, and you try it again. Right. And, thinking about at home, how do we treat failure? Right. Are we treating it as an endpoint or a midpoint? At home, how do we build in choices? What does that look like? Are we giving kids responsibility?
So John, can I jump in here just real quick? I
Yep.
wanted to just address, somebody in the chat had asked what you had said was on the website. So it was the My Goal Plan and examples of My Goal Plan, and some videos related to that. And Lauren had put that in the chat box, but I just wanted to make sure that the person in the chat, was acknowledged about wanting that. I want to give, if I could just give a super quick example too about choices.
Yeah.
I was doing some work a few weeks ago in Indiana, and I was doing family interviews, and the family were talking about their daughter who has a significant disability, and the mom said, well, if you give her the choice between 3 things and verbally give her the choice, she's going to pick the last thing every time, no matter what. So if you said, do you want pizza, or do you want burgers, or do you want liver? Even though clearly she doesn't want liver, because liver was the last thing that she heard, that's what she's going to choose. And so I asked the mom, I said, have you ever tried pictures? Have you ever tried taking a picture of the burger and the pizza and the liver and then asking her to pick the picture of the one that she would like to have for dinner? And she said that she's never tried that, but she thought that that would work to be able to get to the choice that mom anticipated that the daughter actually really wanted. So when we talk about choices, we also have to think about ways to accommodate, to make sure that the individual is in a position to make the choice that they want, right?
Absolutely. To go along with, I'm going to talk about two more tools also that are on determine.org. There are also web apps. So if you have a student that prefers visuals, you can make the entire tool using visuals. And so we have an icon library, but you can also just upload, like if your kid likes Domino's pizza, then you can go to Domino's, take a picture on your cell phone and upload that picture and use it on one of the undetermined tools. And so, absolutely. Deciding when to complete chores. I'll just give you my example real quick. My two kids, the rule used to be you had to have your chores done on Sunday. My wife and I spent what felt like the entire weekend harassing them to do chores. My wife was also a special education teacher for 15 years and is now a counselor. And, one day I was just like, I'm like, this is the opposite of what I talk about. What am I doing? This is terrible. And so we all sat down and said, this is the deal. The chores need to be done at 3:00 on Sunday. I don't care when you do them. They broke up the chores and they each chose which ones they were going to do. And if the chores weren't done at 3:00 on Sunday, they had to turn over their cell phone. And so, this is years ago. We're still using this model to this day. My oldest does her chores on Saturday and is not stressed out and everything's fine. And my youngest, every Sunday at 2:59 is sprinting to the house, finishing up the last chore, right? The difference is I'm not stressed out about it and my wife's not stressed out about it. And the kids aren't fighting it because they're controlling what they do and when they do it. And so, giving those choices. And then back to this idea of scaffolding, right? And failure. I think sometimes we over scaffold, we over support, right? And when we over support, a couple things happen. One, sometimes it gets done quicker because we're just giving too much support. But also, look, if every day you're going to make me a sandwich for lunch and all I have to do is get out the bread and you're going to do everything else, I'm going to let you do that for me forever, right? Because making a sandwich is not my preferred activity, right? And so sometimes we've got to remember to lower that scaffold. And you know what? If failure happens, it's not a big deal. We talk about it, we stop, we reassess, and we make a better sandwich, right? So just not forgetting that. And look, there are times, right, when you just got to tie your kid's shoes because you got to get out the door, right? And I want to normalize that behavior because that is okay. That just can't be every morning, right? Or we're never going to master the skill. And for autonomy, again, on the website, you can just Google, and on the PowerPoint, when you get a copy that's on the RAISE website, there's a QR code in the bottom right that you can just scan. It takes you right to the specific page that gives you all the resources. But after this, if I'm going too quick and you missed anything, you can email me directly and I'll send you the exact link that you need for what you're looking for. But again, just a simple tool to help kids identify strengths, preference, interests, needs. You can make the whole thing with pictures if you want. You can use words and pictures. But it's just an easy way to start identifying these things and then, kind of giving them a talking point when they want to try to take the initial step in advocating for themselves. And the last one is relatedness. So this just idea of sense of belonging. How do we foster that? So we look at goal setting, we look at self-awareness, and we look at self-efficacy. And I will tell you, with Undetermined, every summer, we bring, a couple hundred kids from Virginia, transition age kids with disabilities, all across the spectrum of disability to the university for 3 days with their families. And we do a conference, basically a summit, and one for the kids and one for the families, and we keep them separate. And every year, students come who've never been before, and their first sense of belonging is they thought they were the only one in the world with their disability, right? Think about how lonely that can feel, right? And only one in the world with intellectual disability, only one in the world with dyslexia, only one in the world with CP, only one in the world experiencing these specific challenges. And their first feeling when they come is always this relief that they're not alone. And it amazes me every year. I don't know. I haven't figured out where this starts or how to fix it. But I do know that we need to be looking for inclusive opportunities. I will tell you this, if we're talking about post-school outcomes and we're talking about the goal of employment, right, of competitive employment, if we don't have inclusive schools where our kids are with general education students in an inclusive environment, right, then you can go through high school as a kid without a disability. You could go through high school and never see someone with a disability, and you can go off to college, and you can come back home, and you can open a business, and then someone like me walks in and tries to talk about hiring individuals with disabilities, and they have no concept of what we're talking about or someone to link that to, and the answer is always no, thank you, I don't want to do that, right? Versus a fully inclusive school where kids have opportunities and they see individuals who use accommodations, who maybe use a wheelchair, whatever, right? But they're part of the community. It makes a tremendous difference. And I've seen it just around here in the different communities. This idea of fostering peer relationships, disability awareness for everybody. Okay. So obviously, if you're a student with a disability, you should have an idea of what your strengths, preference, interests, needs are, right? General education teachers need some disability awareness. A lot of times families need it. I can still remember being at the meeting and I've got a terminal degree in special education, and the doctor diagnosing my daughter with ADHD and anxiety. And I promise you, it is, I heard it, and then I just went, and I just went blank, and I just started spinning in my head, like, what does this mean? What do I need to get in place? And, a lot of my research was not around, it had not been around ADHD. And I had so many questions, and I knew where to go to find the answers, right? But how many families do, right? That initial eligibility is not the most appropriate time to I'm not going to come prepared with questions. I just maybe heard of autism for the first time because you just told me. And so this idea that, man, we really need to do a better job of disability awareness around strengths, preference, interests, and needs, right? And so, quickly around this idea of peer relationships, I'll just tell you this story because I think it just really spells out what we deal with. And so I had a teacher at a high school contact me, and she wanted to start a chess club. She was working with a couple of boys who are identified as having autism. And she said, hey, I want to start a chess club for these kids. And I said, and she wanted some funding. And so I said, well, okay, does a chess club already exist at the high school? And she's like, yeah. Well, so I said, well, why not just join that one? Like, what do we do? We're gonna have a separate chess club for kids with autism? I don't understand that. She's like, well, I don't know. I feel uncomfortable. So she was uncomfortable. I said, well, what are you worried about? And she said, well, I don't know. do you think we should do some disability awareness training? I said, look, write down all your concerns. I'll come in and address them and with you. And so, we met with the current chess club after talking to the parents of the kids with autism. Look, we did a little bit of disability awareness. All those kids wanted to know is, could these new kids play chess? That's all they cared about, right? And so we made an inclusive chess club, and guess what? The boys with autism came in and smoked all the other kids, right, playing chess. And now guess what? They're all buddies, right? And so sometimes we overcomplicate things as adults. I don't know. I just feel like let's start with inclusion and then provide the scaffolded supports we need. And I think in general, as a community, we'll go much further. And then lastly, this idea of common goals. I'll just, we don't have to be the mentor, the link for every kid. So when I have a kid that is interested in farming or gardening and I'm not, I go find someone who is, and I link them together, right? Sometimes as parents or special educators, we feel like we've got to be the point person all of the time, right? And so, and sometimes that we create our own non-inclusive protected space, and that just in the end, right, that doesn't lead to this idea of independence and self-determination. So, not being defined by your disability. And so I always push, even for the parents, right? The parents have been hammered a lot of times with this deficit base, and they want to protect their kids, like Sean was saying, and and you can get stuck in that mindset, right? Flip that. What are their strengths? What are their interests? What are their activities? What exists in the communities that they can tap into, right? So where I live, we have unified sports. It's just a perfect example of, kids with disabilities and without disabilities playing on a team together. We've got basketball and we've got baseball, right? It's not the solution, but it's definitely a start in the right direction. And the community comes together and supports the events, right? But it's an inclusive mindset. So, looking to what's available in the community, or as a parent center, sharing with our families, like, look, you have access to this just like any other parent. Like, you're a member of this community. And sure, there might be some additional supports that are needed, but let's start there. And I think a lot of times, I know it can be scary for parents, but if we can set up the supports, I think a lot of that fear gets abated. And, I usually, if I'm working with a new family, honestly, sometimes I tend on the first time to be like over support just to make sure it goes well and that they have a good experience so that we can try it again, right? And then we start kind of peeling away the onions and the layers of scaffolding. All right, so then the last plan is just the goal plan. And again, I use this to connect kids with either other kids or with adults, right? And so if I've got, Sean, and Sean's interested in running a marathon, and I am definitely not going to run a marathon, then I'm going to go find the track coach, or I'm going to go find someone in the community who's a runner, right? And so this is just a nice kind of way also to, figure out what your kids are interested in and what they're kind of thinking for their future. Because I will tell you this, a lot of times it is not the same as what the parents are thinking, right? And so this can just be a nice little tool to get the conversation started. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Sean for the for the final discussion. But just a reminder, the website is enormous. We've been a project since 2006. If you're on there and need some help, please don't hesitate to email me, because I can find you what you need much faster than you will by just kind of digging through things. So don't hesitate. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, John. Great information. I know that a lot of our wheels are turning. I can see the chat box just popping off, my comments aside. So as I was listening to John, and again, knowing, having a background in the parent world, I could think of a lot of different ways to connect some of the strategies that John was talking about to things that that parent projects could do. But I would love to throw this back to you, and maybe in the chat box we could start, and then if we get some intriguing ideas, if possible, we could even unmute you if that's a thing. And so what are some activities that you can do as a parent center to support families to increase youth self-determination? And this was and then also too, Ray is asking, how do we, okay, so John put his email in the chat box if you want any information directly from John, but go ahead and throw it in the chat box. What do you think now, having heard John, are some activities that you can do as professionals to get at some of the things that John was talking about? I'll give you time to think about it. I'll give you time to type. When I do that, as you're thinking about your responses, I also want to point out that John and I authored a couple of briefs for Ray's on this particular topic, and I'm not sure, Lauren or Josie, if they've been unleashed to the public yet. But a lot of the strategies that John talked about are included in the briefs. And so the two briefs are one that was written for families on supporting self-determination in their loved one with a disability. And then the second brief was aimed at parent training professionals. How can you support families to support this? And so we tried to get at both audiences, and those, if they're not available now, will be available very, very soon to you. Okay, so let's get to your answers. Again, I want to hear from you guys. What tell me about you as parent projects. What do you think you'd be able to do to be able to support families? So Sharon says training webinars to provide information and ideas. So how many of you currently do any type of training around self-determination? You can just throw that in the chat box, or you can raise your hand, or however you want to. Is this something that you have planned or have done in the past? Would love to hear that. Dana says they touch on it somewhat in their parent trainings, somewhat built in. And so Donna asks, what is the website? It's imdetermined.org. All right. Any other ideas that you guys have in terms of specifically, for example, how could you support families to advocate for more inclusive activities in the school? I thought that was really an interesting thought, because a lot of times when we think about inclusion, we see inclusion, but it's not really inclusion. I wonder, for example, like the stories of the kid with a disability on the football team, and then they give him the football and he runs for a touchdown and nobody tackles him. Is that inclusion? I don't know. That is. I don't think so either, Ray, frankly. And so when we think about real inclusiveness, I think about John's story about the chess team. And it's like, hey, you've got some skills. Let's come and join us because we've got this thing going. Sharon says we encourage it in our webinars, but nothing specific. Charissa says, yes, we do. We have a whole section of training that we do around transition age children. Excellent. Self-determination. I think it goes back to separating them and not trying them together. Paired engagement, self-determination. So those are hard habits to break in terms of trying to get this done, Tammy. So I think that's a great point.
One thing real quick, Sean.
Please.
So tomorrow we're having our second ever. Last week we had our first ever I'm Determined youth event for preschool students. And so this idea of starting early man, what a difference. It is so much easier to work with a 4-year-old and start there than it is to start with a 16-year-old. And the cool thing about the 4-year-olds, when we ask them, what are you good at? Guess what? They all could tell you, right? So what happens from 4 to 16? So why can't that 16-year-old tell you when the 4-year-old self could, right? And so starting early with everyone, man, it is so much easier, you know, and I think that's just really important. And I've learned that with my own kids. Starting early with them has led to, you know, just, they have skills that, you know, I didn't have until I was like 35 and they have it at 15 and 16 years old.
You know, and as we wrap up on our time here, I'm going to toss it over to Josie or Lauren here in just a second. But, you know, I think that's an important point. When I was working at the parent centers, we were very segmented in our programming, right? So there was the transition staff and the advocacy staff and the early childhood staff and this staff and that staff. And within your projects, it may be necessary to promote this idea that self-determination is not a transition conversation. Self-determination is a lifespan conversation. From birth to death, everybody needs to continue to build skills. My brother has a developmental disability. He's 45 and he's just learning to drive. I mean, everybody needs new opportunities and opportunities to make choices. So with that, I want to thank John for his partnership on this. Always a pleasure. I just love listening to him. And Josie, thank you for giving us the opportunity to share this information, because we're both very passionate about it. But I want to hand it to you for any final words.
Great. Thank you both so much. And as we close today, you will be getting a follow-up email soon with the recording from today in English. We will also make sure that the Spanish is recorded and available. You will get the slides, although they are already online, but you will also be the first to receive these handouts, these documents that were developed by Sean and John. That's part of the joy of being on this call, is you all got a little bit of a insider's look to what we've developed with their help and wisdom. So I thank you all so much, and have a wonderful day.